Being reflective and looking back on failures or successes is always a good thing to do because you can learn a lot from those periods of time. And in particular, it's always kind of funny to see um, the pro Margaret Thatcher wing of the Conservative Party is still there. They are still pro Thatcher, still pretty much adamant that the worst thing the Conservative Party ever did was get rid of Thatcher, and they still cry and moan about it today. And we've actually seen that from time to time appear on the channel when we've covered some of the Conservative Party conferences, and they've actually openly said that that they still wish that Thatcher had remained leader, that the party shouldn't have got rid of her. But it's completely wrong from the fact that people did not, or at least those people will not look back on certainly her government, her actions that she was taking while she was governing, her policy decisions, many of which we are still living with the consequences of today. There's just no reflective look back on this. And unfortunately, it is the same for Jeremy Corbyn as well. There is a very large, well, hopefully seemingly diminishing, because it does seem to be at least going down, of people who on the left are obsessed with this idea that Corbyn could do no wrong, that he was absolutely perfect. And I will say this on this channel now, I don't think Corbyn was perfect. I think domestic policy he was pretty good on, but I think when it came to foreign policy, he was awful. I think if he had won in 2019, I think Labour would have booted him out over not supporting Ukraine. And I still will say that his policy, his current policy, and his stance on Ukraine, be it sort of quote principled about being wanting peace, or a commitment to pacifism that he seems to have taken. I still think there needs to be, well, even then you need to look at why aren't you supporting them, and that maybe you should be supporting them. Just otherwise, well, there's going to be bad outcomes. To be honest, for the people of Ukraine, and it leads to sort of larger discussions. And of course, we've talked before about all these people on the left talk about peace, but okay, how do you achieve that peace, and how do you make sure it's a lasting peace as well? These are the questions you don't really see about that. Like I say, it's a larger conversation, but the thing that you do see a lot of still is the numerous conspiracy theories coming out about, oh, this is why Corbyn lost in 2019, or this is why, without really looking at the reasons why he lost. Because Corbyn became massively unpopular to a point where he just did not do anything about it. The media campaign, yes, there was a very vicious media campaign against Jeremy Corbyn, but he helped it every single step of the way. He was not playing the PR game, and numerous times you can find quotes of people in his inner circle, or anything like that, saying, "Oh yes, we're not going to play the PR game." But if anything, Corbyn showed how important it is to play the PR game. If you don't play it, then someone else will set the narrative for you. And then the whole thing with the anti-Semitism claims. Well, I personally never saw it, and I will say I never saw it. But when I look back on it and I look at other people's experiences, especially Jewish people's experience in the Labour Party, when you've got numerous examples out there, and you have a big survey of at least 85% of Jewish members of the Labour Party felt that there was a problem in the party, at what point do you turn your head away, or at least at what point do you go, well, if 85% of members think there's a problem with this, do you ignore it? Do you acknowledge it, or do you actually do something about it? And there are lots of problems, and I think a lot of people on the left are finally really taking off those rose-tinted glasses and looking back and really reevaluating that period. And today, I think we're going to go over a piece just on that, of reevaluating that piece and really looking at why that is. And I think it's very, very interesting to sort of cover this. And this comes from Workers' Liberty, which is very, very pro-socialist, pro-workers' rights, blog. So even when they're saying this about, well, you've got to really look back on what was going on there, it does leave me somewhat hopeful that we are maybe at a turning point on this. And there will always be those people who will always cry forever about Corbyn, double down news. They will always cry forever about the loss of Corbyn, and there will always be, the occasional people. Owen Jones, of course, will always do that as well. But you've got to really look back, and of course, you've got to look forward. You've always got to keep on looking forward, because you will have losses, and you can't just seem to just stop, as many people have in 2019, and just have not advanced their view on there, and just cannot seem to get over that loss in 2019. Like it or not, Corbyn was massively unpopular, and a lot of people can't even seem to accept that. So we're going to go having a look into this, because I think this is a really good piece to look into on this, and seeing how you've got other leftists saying, well, we shouldn't be falling into these conspiracy theories or making up excuses as to why Labour lost in 2019. We've got to look at the reality of it. So, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. Like I say, please do click on the like and share button. And of course, there is the Patreon page down below. There's the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee. Buy Me Coffee. And of course, there is the YouTube thank you button and the Pony Club down below as well. So, let's have a look at this on Workers' Liberty with the title of Old Friends and Conspiracy Theorists. So, loyalty to old friends is an admirable thing, but it can be taken too far, especially in politics. And the Morning Star is nothing if not loyal towards Jeremy Corbyn, who wrote a weekly column for the paper between 2005 and 2015. In its 10/11 June edition, the paper devoted over 8 pages of a celebration of Corbyn's 40 years as an MP. And there's a chunky interview with the editor, Ben Carlo. Lindsey Graham praises Corbyn for calling for peace in Ukraine, i.e. for Ukraine to capitulate. Islington friends of Jeremy Corbyn hail him as a man of the people, and one of Shelley Rain describes how she and her friends grew to respect and trust and even love him as a leader. David Rosenberg of the Jewish Socialist Group notes that Corbyn often spoke at Cable Street commemoration events, and David was particularly impressed by his no-frills persona and at ease at which he mingled with activists. If this all sounds like uncritical adulation, that's because it is. It was just one piece that attempted to analyze why Corbynism eventually failed, and that was by Andrew Murray, who was formally and again resigned from the Communist Party of Britain in order to become a key member of Corbyn's team between 2018 and 2019. And Murray has written many articles and a book, all blaming the 2019 election defeat on Labour on its failure to accept Brexit. Also, the line taken by the innumerable Morning Star editorials. In his June in the June 10th 11 article, Murray once again blames Remain supporters for Corbyn's failure, saying the movement and its leadership impaled itself on the Brexit issue and ended up abandoning the successful 2017 policy of accepting the referendum decision to leave the EU in order and favour of giving the Remain side another crack at winning a majority before the first decision had ever been implemented. Murray has to admit that undoubtedly, this is why many Corbyn supporters. This is what many Corbyn supporters actually wanted. But he made it clear in previous articles and in his book, he thinks Corbyn should have overruled the wishes of the membership in his Morning Star piece, and argues that most Corbyn supporters were surely much more invested in getting their leader into Downing Street than to implement to implement his agenda than staying in the EU. Even if Murray is right about that, he ignores a fundamental point. In survey after survey, the reason given by voters for not backing Labour in 2019 was not Brexit alone, but Jeremy Corbyn himself. This may well have been, in part, as the result of the very vicious media campaign. But all the polling evidence is that voters went off Corbyn in a big way between 2017 and 2019. And that can't be put down to just right-wing media. YouGov, for instance, conducted a survey of nearly 500 voters who'd voted for Labour in 2017 but defected in 2019. And the biggest reason for that defection, mentioned by over 35% of those surveyed, was Corbyn's leadership. True, Brexit was next on the list of reasons, with 19% saying it was their main reason for defecting. Even there, the story is not quite what Murray and the Morning Star would have you believe. YouGov also commented at the time it wasn't just due to Corbyn's position being too far towards Remain, just 3% thought that, or too far towards Leave, with just 6% thinking this, but rather than the fact that he doesn't seem to have any position at all, making him look weak and indecisive. To his credit, though, Murray, unlike many of the Morning Star contributors, does not fall back on conspiracy theories about the supposed Zionist plots, and in fact explicitly rejects the idea that claims of anti-Semitism were conducted. Saying when about 85% of Jewish people feel that there is a problem, there is a problem. No avoiding it. And that is from one of Corbyn's closest allies at the time, obviously being pretty much in his inner circle. That is inescapable. I completely agree. When you've got that statistic, when about 85% of, again, Jewish people are saying that there is a problem, you can't avoid it. So Murray's frankness on that particular issue sits uncomfortably with his participation in the film "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn: The Big Lie," removed from the Pavilion, the Pilton Palladius schedule at Glastonbury, but also shown elsewhere. There, that it does centre on a supposed Zionist conspiracy against Corbyn. And the Morning Star editorial of the 21st of June has described the film as being about the, quote, forces that brought down the Corbyn movement. So, in the absence of any coherent analysis of Corbyn's failings, the Morning Star once again falls back on the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and a failure to inaccurately and a can't even say it and a factually inaccurate fairy story about Brexit. So I think there you have it. And I think, to be honest, I see now, I think a big turning point where a lot of people on the left are finally really, really looking back at the Corbyn years and saying, we need to move on. And to be honest, I've said this for quite a while. I don't think Corbyn was a particularly good leader. I think, you've got big problems in the fact of his whole stance on Ukraine. Like, say, when a lot of these people on the left, especially in the UK, when they're calling for peace, they're basically saying, Ukraine should capitulate. And given what we've seen of what probably Russia would do to Ukraine if they did capitulate now, yeah, it would not be good. It would really not be good at all. Russia would be incredibly vindictive towards Ukraine. So it would be, how would you preserve peace and stop potentially any disasters happening again? We saw what happened at Bakhmut. How would you go about stopping that? These people don't want NATO involved. They want NATO dissolved. So who decide who gets to keep the peace there? Ultimately, I've seen pieces and people say that if that happens, it should be Russia. And they get to build, military bases in Ukraine, which basically would make Ukraine a permanent puppet state of Russia. Again, like I say, I'm getting off topic there, but yeah, this is where we are, I think, in terms of movement. I think there really is a turning point. I think a lot of people really are starting to generally look back at the Corbyn movement and generally starting to see why they did not win in 2019. And a lot of them are coming to the same conclusion that it was to do with Jeremy Corbyn, it was to do with his leadership, and to do with a whole range of things and the problems that his leadership was causing. So there's no escaping it. And you have to have an uncritical look back at it. And I've always said, if someone wants to come and debate me on this, that the door's open. We'll discuss those years. We'll discuss what a complete and absolute mess the 2019 manifesto was. I mean, you can just sum that all up in 2 words: free broadband. As good as a policy that would actually be, the way it was sold to the British public has basically ensured that for the time being and probably for a considerable future, that policy is just completely off the table because of how bad a bungled policy it was made by Corbyn and his team. Because you had Labour MPs having no idea how to even sell it, and it made them look really, really foolish. And a perfect example of that was on BBC Radio Sheffield, where I think you had the I can't remember what the MP's name was, but he was challenged on it by, I believe at the time it was Plusnet's boss, and he just ripped into shreds. He had no comeback on it because he hadn't been properly briefed about it. And he wasn't the only one. He wasn't the only one on that. There were many, many, Labour MPs who were just looking at stuff in this manifesto because they hadn't been given it ahead of time because they were so scared that they were going to get such pushback from it, and it was just a complete and absolute mess. Even though I agree with with a lot of stuff that was in there, it was just a complete mess. There's no way of getting around that. And I'm glad that there does really now seem to be a proper rethink about Corbyn and learning the lessons. And especially, hopefully, if you ever do get, someone, a really, socialist guy in again to lead Labour, then hopefully the lesson will be learned of you have to play the PR game. Because there's numerous quotes out there of Corbyn himself, and even sort of members of his team, numerous times saying how they're not going to engage with hostile media and hostile press, and not going to play the PR game. And I've said it before: if you don't play the game, someone else will play it for you. And of course, there's no guarantee they're going to be sort of favourable to you, as we saw. And it does come down to the fact that it wasn't just the media campaign; it was ultimately Corbyn's leadership. It's in the YouGov poll. Why did you switch? Corbyn's leadership, and that alone is a very valid question to anyone who might want to challenge me on this. How would you respond to that? The fact that you've got this YouGov poll that says, okay, so you voted for Labour in 2017, but you switched over in 2019. Why? The number one reason, remember, is Corbyn's leadership. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, please do remember to click the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.